Warframe's resident cat lover Khora got a bit of a double-edged sword update in the latest patch Techrot Encore, where she got a nerf with the Pseudo Exalted Rework and a buff through it as well. The way I like to look at it is that she has lower single target damage, but because of some of the changes, she's much easier to use and at least for the moment with melee influence has higher overall damage over a wider area. So let's go over the changes that's happened to her and the build that I'm currently using for her, Venari, and her new exalted weapon for her Whipclaw. If you've kind of stepped away from Warframe, what's changed about her with Techrot Encore? Well, first and mainly, she no longer has a Pseudo Exalted ability, being her first ability Whipclaw, and it's now a full-fledged exalted weapon on its own. For those who don't know, a Pseudo Exalted ability was an ability that used the mods on your regular melee weapon to increase its potential damage, but that made for some really weird interactions. For instance, it included nearly all mods, meaning that Rivens and even Incarnate evolutions would affect it. That ended up causing some issues, especially for newer players. It meant to get the most out of frames with these kinds of abilities, being Ashe, Atlas, Gara, and of course Khora. You basically needed an outrageously expensive ribbon for a specific weapon with an Incarnate. This meant that these frames were significantly less accessible, greatly confusing for new players, and if you got any of those frames in modes with random loadouts like Arcane or the Circuit, they basically weren't usable unless you had that specific weapon for that build in your random loadout. However, this did come with a trade-off. Because we no longer have those pseudo-exalted stat sticks as they were called, these frames are dealing a bit less damage. So instead of a billion damage, now it's just a couple million. Oh no, whatever shall we do? But in return for this kind of nerf, she did receive a number of buffs to go along with it. First and arguably most important, her Whipclaw now has access to Arcanes, meaning the oh great and all-powerful melee influence works on it, and will be using that to help drive her damage. Secondly, her ability scales much better with combo counter than before. Previously, it was on a quarter basis, so if you had 12 times combo multiplier, she would get only 4 times damage. And now it's just a straight 1-to-1 conversion, meaning that keeping your combo up will greatly increase your damage output. Also, they now have access to mods that previously weren't usable, like Condition Overload or Melee and Galvanized Elementalist. And lastly, Whipclaw now scales with range in 2 ways. The first stat you see is how far out from Khora the AoE will happen, and the second stat is for the AoE radius. The second one is hard capped at 10 meters from ability range, but a melee range mod like Reach can get you above that. So let's get into the build. Since Khora's Whipclaw does count as a melee weapon, I've chosen to go for Steel Charge to improve that further, but other excellent choices could be Corrosive Projection for reducing enemy armor, or Brief Respite to increase her survivability through shield gating and generation. Of course, I'm also using Prime Sure-Footed for the massive damage increase, but mainly so I don't have to worry about knockdowns. I've thrown on Umbral Vitality and Intensify to boost up her health and power strength, which Whipclaw does scale from, albeit not well. The strength is mainly there for our Helminth. Next, I've thrown on what is arguably the most mandatory mod for her Whipclaw build, her Augment Accumulating Whipclaw, which will increase its damage based on the number of times you hit at least 3 enemies with it, to a maximum of 350%, but will slowly decay over time if you don't hit at least 3 enemies. Because this augment and ability strength don't really play well together scaling-wise, you don't need to invest into strength as heavily as I have here. It's mainly there to boost the buff we're getting from our Helminth of choice, in my case it's Grendel's Nourish. To further buff Nourish's effectiveness, I've gone with Blind Rage, but you can put on a Prime Continuity if you'd rather have a longer duration. I find that the base 25 seconds is enough for me. Because Blind Rage also decreases our ability efficiency, this actually makes it so Augur Reach will be giving us a bit more shields through its set bonus of giving shields and overshields based on the energy spent on an ability, giving us some shield gating and more survivability. I'd also recommend to throw on an Augur Pact onto your secondary weapon as well, just for good measure to get that set bonus up a bit more. When we combine Augur Reach with Arcane Stretch, this will give our Whipclaw a 17.5 meter reach and an 8.75 meter radius. Since this is hard capped at a 10 meter radius from ability range, we are leaving a bit of AoE on the table. But I find that the energy regeneration from Arcane Stretch's 2 energy per second, which does get buffed from Nourish's energy multiplier and is being activated by the electric we have on our Whipclaw, it's a worthy trade-off for the ease of use of her kit. Next, we have Prime Flow to increase our overall energy above 500 for our shard choices and to fuel our constant casting. Lastly, I put on a Rolling Guard for a status cleanse as well as some more invulnerability, but adaptation works too if that's more your style. I'm using Arcane Fury as it will significantly increase our damage. Fury will activate off of your Whipclaw attack, so there's no worry about getting it going, and we're getting some more strength for Nourish with Molt Augmented. Molt is definitely a flex arcane here, so try out some other ones to see what fits you best. I did try Arcane Arachne as well, but for some reason it was actually decreasing my damage, so that could just be an interaction with a combo I haven't accounted for, or perhaps there's a bug with it right now, or I'm just crazy. Alternatively, of course, you could go for the Arcane Avenger Combat Discipline combo as well for greater critical chance, but I'm personally not a huge fan of the loss of health that it gives, so me not using it is mainly just personal preference. If you're looking for more survivability, I might recommend using Arcane Aegis to play more into the quasi-shield gating we're going for. As I mentioned, I'm using Nourish for my Helminth of choice, as that's really just a huge quality of life increase for this kit due to the energy economy it's giving us through its energy gained multiplier. But it'll also give her Whipclaw a significant viral boost, increasing her overall damage through the status effect and the buff's damage increase. If you don't like Nourish, some other excellent options are Kulavo's Wrathful Advance for greater critical chance, Rhino's Roar for more damage, Mirage's Eclipse for versatility of either damage reduction or damage buff, Shock and its Augment Shock Trooper from Volt for a big electrical damage boost and to save mod space on our Whipclaw, or Sevagoth's Gloom for crowd control and lifesteal. All of these helmets want to be put over her third ability, Venari, as you'll still keep her around even if you helmet over the third ability, essentially giving you a free extra Kavat for the mission. If you're not going with Nourish, I'd recommend using Arcane Energize then in that flex spot that we talked about, since you'll be losing a lot of energy regeneration from the loss of Nourish. Shards wise, we're keeping it nice and simple. I have 4 Violet Shards for a critical multiplier boost as we have over 500 energy with Primed Flow, and another Violet Shard to give us energy when we pick up Health Orbs. But honestly, you could just use all 5 Violet Shards as critical multiplier if you wanted to. If you're not using Nourish, then I might recommend to swap some more of these shards to the Health Orb conversion to energy to assist in our energy economy, as with Venari and another companion with Synth Deconstruct, you'll have a bunch of Health Orbs in mission to turn into energy. For Focus School, I personally like to run Zeneric for the constant energy supply it offers this build through its Energy Pulse passive and Wellspring ability. And like Arcane Stretch, its energy per second gain is increased by Nourish, meaning that with these 3 things active, you should be completely fine on energy economy even with the ability spam playstyle of Khora. Some of you may want to run Narman for the Power Spike passive for the slow decay of combo duration, but I find just running some Dexterity Arcanes on our primary and secondary are more than enough to maintain our combo duration as they stack, giving us an extra 15 seconds of combo duration. Venari is basically just a buffer for our Khora, giving us access to a ton more slots for bond mods. Nothing here is exceptionally important, but I'd recommend to use Vicious Bond to occasionally reduce the enemy's armor, Prime Pack Leader to keep her alive and healthy, and Synth Deconstruct for more health orb drops to help keep you healthy in a mission with Restorative Bond. Basically, any bond mods that you don't already slot into your regular companion, you throw on Venari. This is a pretty basic build for her claws, just to help out Venari dish out some extra damage, and also hunt down any pesky Overguard units out there with Assassin's Posture. Swipe is kinda nice to have on here to help out with Synth Deconstruct's health orb generation too. And like our Excalibur build, I tend to use this combo with my Feral Predicite seen here, and there's also a short in the description going over its build, because its Augment Anabolic Pollination will combine with the Viral from Nourish for more damage, and Duplex Bond for the occasional energy orb generation. But it doesn't really matter if I'm going to be honest, I just recommend to make sure that Venari or your other companion has Tenacious Bond on it so that you get that free critical multiplier. Like on Venari, this Claw build is fairly cookie cutter. Basically just throw on as much damage and utility as you can to help deal with Overguard units and to give you a bit of status spreading and priming as well. But honestly, there's so many great companions out there right now like the Seneca, the Helminth Charger, Panzervulpaphyla, not even to mention the great sentinels like the Dirigia or Nautilus, or even a Hound. Go with whatever works best for you, I just prefer the Pharaoh. Alright, now for the Whipclaws mods. Of course, we have our base stance here because that's our only option. Since this kind of exalted weapon can't do a heavy attack or parry, we don't have access to a melee Exilus slot, so we save some mod capacity there. We're using Blood Rush and Galvanized Steel to drive our critical hits into the orange crit range, which is getting its critical multiplier from Galvanized Steel and the purple shards that we talked about earlier, making Whipclaw hit really hard. Since this build will get Whipclaw up to about a 200% status chance with Weeping Wounds at a 12 times combo multiplier and the on-kill effect from Galvanized Elementalist, I'm running Condition Overload for our base damage mod, but Prime Pressure Point will do well if you prefer that. As we have 6 statuses on here when we take into account the Viral from Nourish, Condition Overload can give us potentially 480 damage. Melee Influence will only spread the elemental status effects when it's active, and not IPS. So on this build, it will spread Blast, Electric, and Viral. We're getting Electric from Voltaic Strike, and the combination of Volcanic Edge and Vicious Frost will give it Blast, which is just great fun. Blast got a rework back in the Jade Shadows patch in the summer of 2024, and it now deals an AoE effect once it hits 10 stacks that deal 300% damage in a 5-meter radius around the enemy and then resets back to 0. Since it can be spread by influence, this means that we're getting those 10 stacks super easily and quickly on a ton of enemies. And if there's enough enemies around, it can activate Blast multiple times with just one cast, making the AoE of Whipclaw even more potent. Blast, Electric, and the Slash procs will all gain more damage from Galvanized Elementalist, so we're getting 2 benefits from that mod. And let's bring it all together. There's only one thing you really have to keep in mind, and that's just mash Whipclaw, especially when there's at least 3 enemies in range to get our accumulating Whipclaw buff going for that bonus damage. Make sure to keep the Nourish's buff up as much as possible for that energy regeneration from Arcane Stretch on the Zeneric, and for that bonus viral damage. I don't tend to use her 4th ability Strangle Dome very often in missions unless I need some generalized crowd control because of enemy density or because I took a big hit to my health and shields as a survivability mechanic. Strangle Dome does have a synergy with Whipclaw, where the targeted enemy will take full damage and everything else caught by the Strangle Dome will take half damage, so there's that too. However, her 2nd ability Ensnare is amazing. It'll group enemies together for you, locking them down and making it easier to get your accumulating Whipclaw going. But it's also a strong crowd control. It can lock down mini bosses like the Stalker's Acolytes and Steel Path missions and Demolishers and Disruption missions. Not only that, but enemies caught by Ensnare will take double damage from Whipclaw, and if for some reason they survive, Ensnare will activate again to pull in more enemies, potentially giving you multiple groupings with a single cast for even greater damage. And there you have it. I know a lot of people weren't happy with the changes if you were part of the group of players who used a God Roll Pseudo Exalted weapon. And admittedly, I did have a God Roll Ribbon myself with her, but I think she's still doing well in the sandbox, and the ease of use changes that they gave us, plus the addition of Arcanes to balance it out, to be a fairly good thing for her overall. Let me know in the comments what you think, and a like on the video is always appreciated. And as always, sub for more tips and swing by my Twitch if you need any help.